Hello! Continuing to play around a little bit with this YouTube thingamabob, I thought I would do something a little different this time. Well, this is Charlie. And I want to say a little bit about how Charlie came into our family and how God has a part in that. And how God has worked miracles in our family's life in this last year. Sometimes this last year has been really difficult. It's been hard to see anything good that's come out of it. But there have been some interesting things that God has done. So, what does this little dog have to do with showing the great goodness of God? Well, near the beginning of the pandemic, I was praying, Lord, what's going on? How are we going to get through this? What can we do to make it easier to get through? And I was just pouring my heart out to God. Well, what happened? I got a message from God in my prayer, completely subjective. There's no way you can, I have no proof, no any evidence, but it was, let them get a dog. And I said, okay, and threw that on the discernment pile. It might be right, might be wrong, I didn't know. And to put it in a little bit of perspective, I'd always been opposed to getting a dog. My wife and kids had asked for dogs several times, and I've always said no based on the amount of work and based on the other requirements and travel and all that other stuff. So, well, in the pandemic we haven't been traveling and we've been home, so that work is less, so it sort of makes sense. But I got this message, and then the very next day my wife was working out in the garden. Now, she was working in the front of the garden, and she was building a greenhouse out of wood and stuff and plastic that I got for her previously. So she was out there building, and someone walks by with two dogs, and he was having a little trouble with them. And so she asks, and he starts telling her this story. This one little dog, Charlie is his name, was dropped off at his house several weeks earlier, and the person who dropped him off disappeared. He has not been able to contact her, and he had not been able to talk to her relatives, and she disappeared. The story we got from him was that she had been in a lot of trouble with various things and stuff like that. So, but he was at the point where he couldn't keep both dogs. And he was worried that he was going to have to take one of the dogs to the Humane Society, the dog that was dropped off. And he didn't know what to do with that because it was a pandemic and he wasn't sure what was going on there. So my wife calls me. She calls me and I come up, and she asks me if we can keep the dog. And because the message I got the previous day in prayer, I immediately said yes. Because that was a confirmation of prayer. That was a confirmation that God wanted us to have a dog, I put it as. That he gave me that pre-knowledge that there is something to do, and so my discernment was confirmed. So, a little story about how discernment can be confirmed, and a little story about how God does talk and care for his people. Now, the dog has been a real blessing for us. There's been lots of things that have happened in the year, of course, with the pandemic and restrictions and not being able to visit, not being able to see other people. And that's all been really difficult. And it still is difficult. We're just getting out of another quarantine time for a failed COVID self-assessment test. And Charlie's brought a little bit of extra light into that. A little bit of purpose for some of the kids. A little bit of comfort for my wife. And a little bit of exercise for me when I take on walks. Although today he didn't want to go to a walk. It was snowing outside. He's a little bit strong-willed. And he has issues. at first he had a lot of separation anxiety, and he still does to some extent, but it's getting better because the stories we've got is that he's been passed around a lot before. So we've given this dog a nice home. This dog's been helping our kids learn a little bit about love, and perhaps might learn a little bit about God's love in the process. So I hope you enjoyed the pictures I'm putting in the background here of Charlie, and I hope this turns out okay as my YouTube video. And please subscribe, and I'll hopefully have other stories about how God has worked in my life in the past, and just to show how great our God is and how wonderful is his love. Amen.